How not to treat a ratepayer. How would you like to live a few tens of metres from this? Have a go at this. I do, and I shouldn't have to, because the Resource Management Act of 1991, Section 16 and 326 make that very clear, as have various sources qualified to provide legal advice, and as indeed I was informed by the Regional Operations Manager of the security firm that provides after-hours noise control services to the Tararua District Council. The Tararua District Council, who blatantly refused to address the matter in any way, shape or form. I'm guessing because I'm new to the area, I'm on my own and I don't have the right local connections. Just some, of my attempts to seek their assistance and prompt them to act on their legal obligations are outlined in the following letter that I'll read for you now. This letter's long, but it's fast-paced and it's detailed, and I trust anyone with an interest in local government ethics will have the patience to listen through until the end. Here we go. September 23rd, 2021, to the Mayor and Councillors of Tararua District Council. So to be clear, I have never had any response to this letter, or indeed my previous correspondence to the Mayor and Councillors. Here we go. This letter is to formally express my utter disgust at the Tararua District Council. On April 12, 2020, I had emailed all of the addressees of this letter, that is, the Mayor and the Councillors of the Tararua District Council, outlining an urgent and desperate situation with ongoing, i.e. for over a year as at that date, extraordinary and intolerable noise levels from dirt bike activity within very, very close proximity of my house. I indicated clearly my feeling of extreme vulnerability. I live alone. I am extremely unwell, regarding matters associated with that broader issue. The email was a clear and present desperate plea for help. With that email, I forwarded a trail of written correspondence that I'd had with the Council's then CEO, Blair King. I also forwarded a recording sample of the noise along with proof of my serious illness, which is being very materially worsened by the noise and stress impacts and the overall disruption to my life and any quality thereof. A summary of the key points covered in that April 12, 2020 email includes 1. The excessively loud, extremely agitating, hours-long, often successive days use of the paddock very close to my house as a dirt bike track by the neighbour and at that time multiple miscellaneous children with multiple dirt bikes. This is despite, as I understand it, the neighbour's proximity being more than twice the size of my holding, i.e. the proximity of the chosen paddock is more akin to its being part of my own backyard than that of the neighbour from whose house the paddocks in question are not even visible. Point 2. The fact that I've been extremely ill and the behaviour was and is having a severe negative impact on my health situation and materially impeding my recovery. Notably, I had moved to the semi-rural environment for the express purpose of recovering from a serious illness. Point 3. The fact that my call of inquiry to the council to ascertain my rights with regard to the noise impacts resulted in the neighbour making clear in a subsequent conversation with me shortly afterwards that he'd been advised that I'd quote-unquote complained to the council. It is worth noting the neighbour's exact quote, as included in my email to your then CEO and CC'd for transparency to the neighbour. As I pointed out in that correspondence, the only parties, by the way, who had any awareness of the conversation with the council are those involved with the council. A quick interlude into this letter. The neighbour's exact quote, which I haven't included in this letter but was in previous correspondence to the council, as I said, CC to the neighbour, was this. He called me and said, "Try calling the council again and see how far that gets ya." Well, indeed, as he advised, it hasn't ever gotten me very far. Back to the letter, point number 4. Had any of the TDC councillors taken any interest in reading my correspondence, trailing Blair King's determined attempts to summarily dismiss me, they would have also noted Mr King's clear green lighting of the neighbour's behaviour vis-à-vis Mr King's ill-informed statement, for the neighbour's benefit whom he CC'd, that the neighbour lived on a rural property and he and his children, and assumedly any others, were fully entitled to do what he wanted with motorbikes of any kind where he wanted and make as much noise as he wanted with them. Point number 5. Further, with regard to my drawing the breach of privacy to Mr King's attention, I was asked to provide proof of this. Now, given that the only proof would be for the neighbour to have advised who leaked the call to him, this was, as Mr King was blatantly aware, an impossible request. Point number 6. In terms of issues regarding the professionalism and concern that might arguably be expected of a local council's chief executive officer, I had made mention in the letter of the added distress of an underage child's use of a firearm very, underlined very, close to my house, including whilst I was outside and on that side of the house. It's since been pointed out to me that the TDC CEO should, if acting impartially and responsibly, have urged me to contact the police. Yet no mention was made of that not small matter in Mr King's email back to me. Thankfully, however, the firearm discharging activity ceased soon after sending that email, which in itself was interesting. Not having had any acknowledgement whatsoever from any councillors regarding the above outlined email and forwarded correspondence trail, I sought out a contact number for your Mayor, Ms Tracy Collis. I called her on Monday, April 13, 2020. I resent the above mentioned email at her request, since she'd never bothered to read it. She undertook to investigate the matter and get back to me within 24 to 48 hours. A week later, on April 19, 2020, I received the following email from her. My apologies for not getting back to you earlier. I've asked the councillors for their advice and options on moving forward, and we'll come back to you as soon as I'm able. I do hope you've had a better week. And no further communication was ever received from your Mayor, Ms Tracy Collis. Given the clear stonewalling by council, both at a management and councillor level, which I can only assume must surely be because I'm a newcomer in a very established small community, 1. Shortly thereafter, I emailed the mayors and councillors of several other local government councils asking for advice. It was ironic that I received acknowledgement from a number of these councillors from other council areas, whilst never to this day having received any acknowledgement from the councillors of the Tararua District Council, nor the promised follow-through from the Mayor. Further, various of these councillors from other council regions invited me to call them, which I did. To excerpt directly from the initial email exchange with one senior council member from another region, quote-unquote, noise. Regarding the regulations, you're entitled to the quiet enjoyment of your land. Noise complaints are dealt with from your council, and they are required to act on each complaint. Point number 2. I sought out contact details for and contacted the Regional Operations Manager of Allied Security, the company I understand holds the contract for responding to after-hours noise complaints for the Tararua District Council. He was very clear in his advice to me, quote-unquote, the Resource Management Act gives you as much right to peaceful enjoyment of your property as it does to someone who lives on a corner block in the middle of any town. You have full and legal right to lay a disturbance complaint with the local council and have it acted upon. He went on to quote the specific clause in the RMA, which is as per the result of my next phone call, which was to a lawyer at the Manawatu Community Law Centre, and is as per point 3 below. 3. I called the Manawatu Community Law Centre, whose senior lawyer advised as follows. You indicated you are meeting with a new manager or CEO of the Tararua District Council, and that you would appreciate knowing the particular sections from the Resource Management Act 1991, RMA, which are relevant to your situation, and I have set them out below. And thereafter she goes into quoting from sections 16, duty to avoid unreasonable noise, and 326, the meaning of excessive noise. her reference to my indication that I was going to be meeting with a new manager or CEO of the Tararua District Council was in reference to my hoped for meeting with the new CEO of the Tararua District Council, Brian Nicholson, a request that I'd made at the suggestion of Sergeant Kerry Williamson of Dannevirke Police, who suggested that I might have a more ethical audience with Mr. Brian Nicholson than my previous attempts, but indeed that did not prove to be so, and I was not granted that meeting, but rather my request was not honoured and downgraded to a short, dismissive, rather arrogant few paragraphs in an email from Mr. Nicholson. Back to the letter. Point number 4, my more recent actions have included: I made a formal complaint to the Tararua District Council several months ago. I made the complaint at somewhere around 3 p.m. on, I believe, a Saturday. It appeared that no one attended, and certainly I received no communication from the council or its agents. Thus, I called the TDC phone number on the Sunday morning to inquire as to why the noise officer never turned up. After some apparent looking up of things at the TDC end, I was told that the noise control officer had attended at apparently somewhere around 7 p.m. Aside, this was winter, and of course it would have been dark by then, and obviously dirt bike activity would have ceased. When I asked where he had quote-unquote attended, I was told he had quote-unquote sat down at the road. Now, this is despite having made it abundantly clear to the earlier operator that I have a long driveway, somewhere around 200 metres of driveway, and a back section, and the dirt bike activity is adjacent to that, i.e. a long way from the road. Predictably, this apparently attending noise control officer had therefore recorded that it was a quote-unquote non-issue. To be noted, in contrast with my understanding of the normal practices of councils, no phone call was made to me as a result of that noise complaint, either before, during or after the supposed visit. Rather, I was left to follow up the matter myself to see whether it had actually been actioned. Notably, I was told by the operator that I should call the council during working hours for the answer as to why I was not communicated with as part of the process. Very strange, to say the least. Point number 5, my attempts at mediation with the neighbour. These have included, but have not been limited to, the most recent. That is, a male friend visiting from Palmerston North one weekend was both disturbed greatly by the dirt bike noise himself, and even more so concerned by the very obvious health impacts it has upon me. A very level-headed, 66-year-old with a highly conciliatory manner, he approached the neighbour and his boys, which resulted in a quote-unquote gentleman's agreement on which they literally shook hands. Despite the subsequent delivery by my friend of a carton of high-end beer to the neighbour, the quote-unquote gentleman's agreement lasted less than 2 weeks. Point number 6. In desperation, and given the refusal of the council to enact its legal responsibilities, i.e. the previous CEO having made very clear that he either didn't know what these actually were, or his having assumed that I would myself have no knowledge of the Resource Management Act, I sought help from the local police. Given the very obvious impact of the matter on my serious medical condition, Sergeant Williamson, to whom I furnished medical certification to prove my situation, made a compassion-based judgment and visited the neighbour to present a request for neighbourly consideration and noise relief. Excerpting from Sergeant Williamson's follow-up email, quote-unquote, the neighbours state that they have honoured the agreement that was met several weeks ago in that they no longer ride for pleasure in the paddocks near to your property. They did acknowledge that they do use motorbikes in the paddock next to your property to round up stock, but for no other reason. Quote-unquote. This is flagrantly untrue, as your front desk operator, Ms. Vicky Priday, will, I trust, confirm. See point 7 below. Point 7. Given an uptick in the dirt bike activity this week, and the resultant prompt departure of a visitor from the distress she, a robustly healthy individual, felt from the noise, I again endeavoured to follow up this matter yesterday. I spent some considerable time on the phone providing Ms. Priday with the key elements of the historic and ongoing and unresolved matter. Another 45 minutes of time on my part, completely down the toilet. I put this call to the TDC staff member on speakerphone at various intervals so that she could hear for herself the truly piercing, soul-jarring, all-encompassing nature of the noise, which I believe is at least at times possibly of industrial deafness levels. I wanted to demonstrate how impossible it is to live, think, converse and function normally in this environment when this is going on, to say nothing of the general state of anxiety it causes me to live in and would cause anyone to live in, knowing that it could start up at any moment. Ms. Priday readily acknowledged this and offered her sympathy as well as a proactive undertaking to take the entire issue to the relevant management personnel within the Tararua District Council building and have them call me as a matter of urgency the next day to address the matter. She also undertook to follow up with me on this discussion in turn herself. Predictably, no phone call has been forthcoming from any council representative whatsoever, neither management nor noise control nor Ms. Priday. Point 8. With regard to my earlier attempt to have either a meeting or indeed even a phone call with your current Chief Executive, Mr. Brian Nicholson, you will see from his brief dismissive April 7 letter, which is attached to the covering email of today's correspondence, that he had at least conceded to have his quote-unquote manager regulatory services investigate the matter, after which said manager regulatory services was apparently going to quote-unquote contact you, i.e. me, in relation to this. As of the date of this correspondence to you today, councillors, i.e. September 23rd, 2021, I have received no such contact in any form from your manager regulatory services nor anyone else. Wrapping up, what I would like to happen in response to this correspondence I'm sending you all today, councillors, is this. 1. Some indication that councillors have, if not any actual control, then at the very least some concern over the lax and arguably questionable behaviour of the council's management. 2. I would like to be able to live in my property without being subjected to the horrendous, health deleterious, quality of life decimating noise impacts I suffer from the neighbouring property's dirt bike activities, which, as an aside to this letter, it's not in there, but which I suggest to you are largely for my very special benefit. Because he can. This has gone on unaddressed by council for far too long and is one of the reasons I'm experiencing such a rocky and drawn-out recovery from my illness. Thus, I would like Tararua District Council's Management and Noise Control Security Agency to be forced, if necessary, to action their responsibilities towards me as a ratepayer in the same manner that I feel quite certain they probably do action other noise complaints from other ratepayers, perhaps more established ones within this small community. Albeit, I would be naive to think, certainly now, that any attendance and any assessments of the noise is likely to reflect the actuality of any event or complaint. It'll probably be just another non-issue. 3. If your former CEO was not aware of the Council's responsibilities under the Resource Management Act, as the earlier provided correspondence from him clearly demonstrates he was not, then I would like for councillors to take it upon themselves to organise for this essential and I would have thought basic education to be delivered to your current CEO and his management team. 4. I would like the current Chief Executive to have the at least minimal professional regard for his ratepayer base as to follow through with his own management to ensure that his undertakings to a ratepayer have been honoured, or at least I'd like your CEO not to apply this respect selectively. In closing, I'd like to point out that if I were a tenant of this property rather than the owner, the landlord would have a legal obligation to ensure I had peaceful enjoyment of this property. Why then is it, according to the view and the conduct of your councils, the Tararua District Council's management, that I have no such rights to peaceful enjoyment of my property as property owner and ratepayer? I await your responses. Yours sincerely. So it was September 23rd this year when I sent that, and again the references to earlier correspondence that I made in that related to April 2020. Crickets. from anyone at council. That includes no follow-up contact regarding the formal case number that the council's receptionist allocated to the matter. Since then, I've had one visitor that was so disgusted with the tormenting behaviour I experienced from the neighbouring property that they actually, unbeknownst to me until after the fact, took it upon themselves to make a personal visit to A, the Mayor, Tracy Collis, and B, one of the other councillors. They were told by those parties it's being looked into. And that was a good month ago, and my guess is it's not. The situation's escalated to the point now where I feel really intimidated. A barrister contact advised I take photos and further recordings. I got sprung doing so yesterday by the riders, and the outcome wasn't good. So that's where it's at, folks. The local constabulary says it's a matter for the Tararua District Council, and the Tararua District Council is, as it turns out, at complete liberty to treat me like a complete non-entity. I'm going to make subsequent videos where I give you the responses, or more to the point, the non-responses of all the other local government-related parties I've sought input or assistance from. And if at that point you reckon there's no problem with accountability and ethics in New Zealand's local government sector, then I frankly question your ethics. However, I'm guessing that if you've gotten to the end of this video, you just might have a genuine concern for raising the bar in this very questionable sector of New Zealand's governance environment.